I'm Bruce Warner, the president of the TriMet Board, and I'm going to declare our regular meeting of December 12th, 2012 to order. So with that, I'm going to turn it right over to the general manager and ask you for your comments, Mr. McCarthy.
Mr. Board President, members of the board, everyone, good morning. Obviously, the first thing that I wanted to say is all of our thoughts and prayers are with the families of the victims of the Clackamas Town Center tragedy yesterday afternoon. I do want to also thank the TriMet staff and our first responders that also were involved and responded to that situation very much. As you may know, that caused a disruption to our service where many of our bus lines were diverted off the property of the Clackamas Town Center, did not serve that final stop in the garage of the Clackamas Town Center yesterday. After a brief interruption of sort of figuring out what was going on, the police did allow the trains to continue to serve the platform so our customers could access their cars that were in the Clackamas Town Center parking garage. We also provided for what we call warming buses, which is something we traditionally do in these sorts of emergencies, where in this case, I think particularly the police were offering that it is shelter to the people that they wanted to interview, witnesses to the scene. So we continue to provide those services. And as you may have heard today as well, service to the whole site has been stopped. And so we are routing buses on Monterey, which is north of the public street that's north of the Clackamas Town Center, not serving the garage or either the buses or the Green Line today, but that service continues. So I do just want to, again, particularly thank the TriMet staff that responded to this, and obviously our heartfelt sympathies to all who were involved in the terrible tragedy yesterday afternoon. I did also want to update you a little bit to sort of normal business on our ridership. And we are beginning to change a little bit the way that we report ridership, because what we really want to do, and this is probably more in line with national trends, is to begin to report more on a quarterly basis, because it's really on a quarterly basis we begin to see really be able to judge the effects of our policies on our riders. We will still continue to report the monthly figures, particularly on our website and other places, so they're perfectly accessible. But I make a point to bring it up to you, perhaps more on a quarterly basis as we see the trends. For the fall 2012, we provided more than 25 million trips, and it's for 3 months on Max, West, and commuter rail, West commuter rail, and buses. So overall, our ridership is down about 1.1%, and that's really, frankly, expected after both the fare increase and the reduction in free rail zone, elimination of free rail zone. Recall those were steps we had to take in order to close the budget deficit last year. On the good side, quarterly bus trips were actually up almost 3%, so we're going to continue to see growth in that sort of underlying ridership of the system. Max trips were down about 7%. Almost all of that can be traced to the free rail zone right now. West trips over that quarter also went up, in this case 9% overall, so we continue to see a healthy growth rate in the West trips. Again, I think with those pieces in place, we continue to watch the passenger revenue side, and it was really right on the money in terms of the forecasts that were predicted last year. Maybe 1% variation on one side or the other is what we see right now, which is certainly as close as we can reasonably predict. So we'll keep you updated on this, and I know the board is particularly interested in seeing the effects of the changes that were put in place in September, and we'll, as time rolls on, we'll have more and more information about that, and we'll make sure that you're fully aware of all of that. I did also want to provide a quick update on the Portland-Milwaukee project. You might see we have something that looks a bit like the Washington Monument on the west pier of the river. The crews have finished the concrete pours for that, actually, west pylon as we call it, and there is a temporary cap at the top of it. There will be actually a permanent cap installed before we're done. There's sort of the temporary structure is really to help hold the supporting cables as the bridge is erected, the segments are erected out from the pylon itself. Meanwhile, the east tower continues to rise out of the water. And frankly, if you were at Center Street right now, you wouldn't recognize the street in front of the building. It changes at a really daily basis. I sent out a note to all of our employees, frankly apologizing. I had a dental appointment one morning that caused me to drive to work, and frankly, I came back, I couldn't find my way into a parking lot. So I understand what people are going through now. But it also reinforced my desire to take the bus to work every morning, I think, in that regard. We also see the girders now successfully delivered for the structure that will carry light rail over the ramp on Coma near northbound McLaughlin. So a lot of headway being made in a number of different areas. On the job front to date, we count 4,450 jobs directly generated. That includes right now 1,459 construction jobs. And of the 333 firms that have contracted with the project, 102 are disadvantaged business. And I'm really pleased that, unfortunately, traffic coming back from Salem interrupted my traffic pattern yesterday. But yesterday, we were awarded Agency of the Year by the National Association of Minority Contractors of Oregon. And I want to really publicly, first of all, thank them for the award and the recognition in our long-term partnership with that association, but also particularly thank the staff who have been involved in delivering the high level of DBE participation, because it really is an effort of the team and a commitment of the team to do that. And so I wanted to just acknowledge that and acknowledge the great work that our staff is doing in that regard. And it's nice to be acknowledged in these situations. So with that, I wanted to call up Shelley Lomax, who will be providing, in a sense of a little bit of a briefing, one of the major issues, both for TriMet, but also nationally, is a topic that would be called state of good repair. And this has been a particularly important topic for many of our East Coast properties. Talked about the word number, the T, and some of the issues of age and service reliability that come with that. Indeed, MAP 21, the new federal legislation, emphasized this as a category of work and of funding. And as it turned out, should the appropriations follow the act's note, there will actually be about $4.5 million of new money coming to TriMet dedicated to the purpose of actually making sure the system is in a state of good repair. So we have some opportunities with those funds, and opportunities that need to be identified and wrestled with in the next year's budget process. So just sort of a precursor to that, I was hoping that Shelley could give you a little update about what these issues are and what it is we talk about when we talk about state of good repair.
Good morning, Mr. President and members of the board. As Neil said, I am here to talk about state of good repair. Earlier this year, legislation was passed that really increases the state of good repair for all of public transit. The legislation is titled Moving Ahead for Progress in the 21st Century. We call it MAP 21 for short. And it's a really good thing for public transit. In particular, it's a good thing for TriMet. Let's see if I can make this work. Is there a place to point it? Technical difficulty right out. This is not in a state of good repair. Is it where? Okay, that's not it. There we go. Apparently, it's the person holding the clicker that is not in the state of repair. So, why is state of good repair important? It's important because it helps us provide the type of quality service we want to provide for our customers. It ensures that our transportation is safe and reliable. It protects our investments in our asset, and it meets the requirements of MAP 21. And what I mean by that is, moving forward, when you apply for grants, the federal government is going to require that the transit property is able to demonstrate that they have an asset management plan in place that demonstrates their commitment to maintaining and keeping all of their assets in good working order. This approach really makes sense when you think about it in the long run, because it's far better to maintain what you have than it is to try to fix it when completely stops working. For us, I'm going to just fight with this all day. There we go. It means that for our customers, our vehicles are ready for service, we have fewer breakdowns, that our on-time performance works very well, everything works as it should, that our signals, tracks, electrification, all the systems you see throughout your travels on maps, that things work like they're supposed to. And behind the scenes, it makes sure that our shops are in good working order. And when our customers visit our platforms, we make sure that they have the most up-to-date lighting standards, that we've gone back and taken care of things like crime prevention for environmental design techniques, which weren't in place when we built Blue Line 30 years ago. So it really is the opportunity to take a look at our system as a whole and program in what we need to do to keep things current. So TriMet State of Good Repair. I am just having a devil of a time with this. Give me a second here, would you? We should have numbered our slides. That's what's going on. All right. So as you know, TriMet system, some of it is over 30 years old. And as Max grows, it's going to need an increasing focus. We've also gone a significant amount of time without replacing buses. Even with the most recent 55 buses, our average fleet age is about 13.5 years. And we need to get that down to closely to more like 8 years in order to really have our fleet where we need it to be. MAP 21 funds allow us to think about what our needs are and program them into our budget process. For our customers, this will ensure, having good equipment ensures that our road calls are less frequent. For us, when we talk about a road call, what we mean is a bus that goes out on the road and it's in good working order and something pops up and it either stops working or the operator has to call in and ask for assistance in order to get a bus trade. Now, with bus, that works really well. We can arrange for a trade with fairly minimal impact. There's still a cost to us, but about 1% of our on-time performance last month was impacted by mechanical failures of buses. The difference for us is on Max. When a Max train breaks down out on the system, pretty much slow everything completely to a halt. Just to give you an example, last month, about 9.4% of our Max trips were not on time. They were delayed. And of that, 30% of it were caused by Max failures. Most common failures for us are things like door failures. So if one door hangs up, the train is not going anywhere. So keeping those systems and things in good working order is really important for us. Most of our LRVs, our light rail vehicles, are in some state of ongoing overhaul. Board member Prosser was out recently and got to actually see a Type 1 that was just beginning its full body overhaul, sitting right next to in a bay, one that was just completed, and I think he would agree that it's a night and day difference when you look. The cars come back and they're basically new. We do a complete rebuild from the ground up. Our approach to overhaul, our philosophy is take care of it as you have the vehicle at different phases. Whereas some agencies focus on their preventative maintenance and their routine running repairs instead of doing any overhaul work along the way. Well, what ends up happening with that is you can fall off of sort of this financial cliff. You get to a point where they get to a point where they're having to do complete vehicle remanufacturing, which is very expensive and it takes the train completely out of service for long periods of time, or it really becomes quite expensive.
I thought it was just my eyes.
I wasn't even going to fuss with it because I'm having nothing but trouble with the clicker. Our philosophy, as I said, is to go ahead and do those periodic overhauls of different components along the way. And by doing that, we improve our reliability, we spread out the financial impact, and we expand and extend the length of the life of our equipment. For example, we plan on keeping our trains from the time we buy them to the time we retire them for approximately 40 years. So we get a pretty good return on investment for a very expensive piece of equipment. The approach that we take was recognized by the U.S. Department of Transportation in 1995 as a best practice for the rail industry. You'll see on the bars ahead, I just want to give you an example. So the top bar is our Type 1, and as I mentioned, the Type 1s are at a phase in their life where they're going through complete overhaul now. And we will get those, when they're renewed, we'll keep them until 2026. So we're going to get our money's worth out of those vehicles. If you go down to Type 2s and Type 3s, they're actually, the bar shows a little different, but they're in about the same phase of their overhauls. We're at the place now where we're replacing sort of the moving components, gearboxes, some of the friction brakes, the pantographs, and the tires. When I talk about tires, you all know those are the metal wheels. We replace those about every 250,000 miles. So it's a continuous work in progress, and it's not cheap, very expensive. You all know that you approved the purchase of some new buses, and we're very grateful for that. And I know that each of you has had the opportunity to be on both a new bus and an old bus. And this is just sort of the difference. And it's a night and day difference when you look at the shiny new buses, which our customers love and we love. This is an example of state of good repair, keeping our equipment replaced. Here's another example. This is the behind the scene things. If you look on the left, you're going to see on the left is an old hoist. And this is one of the original hoists from when we built our maintenance shops close to 30 years ago. Compare that to what you see on the right, which is a more state-of-the-art, sturdier built, more reliable component that our maintenance folks need in order to work on the buses. As I said, the 30-year infrastructure is aging. It's showing some wear and tear. If you look here, this is Northeast 11th Avenue, and you can see, if you look closely next to the embedded railway, you can see some erosion there, and you would not want to, if you were driving a car or a bicycle, you wouldn't want to drive over that. It would probably cause you to go to Les Schwab to get a little alignment work done. This type, just to replace this type of infrastructure here to rebuild it, runs about $875,000, so it's not cheap. We can go through some money pretty quickly, but it's necessary for us to keep our infrastructure working as it should. Here's an example of what a rebuilt area looks like, and we hope to do that to 11th Avenue. So what is it going to take for us to be in good repair? We're going to need to stay committed to our bus buys, and I know that you all share that commitment with me. We also need to stay focused on our LRV overhauls, and that includes things like this upcoming budget process. We're planning on purchasing some of the door components that have been causing us trouble, gearboxes. When you're standing next to the platform and the train comes in, have you ever noticed it sort of makes a little kind of like a little, like an engine, kind of a hum? I always thought that was just the sleek sound of the train pulling in, but it's actually not supposed to do that. The mechanics tell me that's a bad thing. That's the sign of the gearbox beginning to wind down. So we need to replace those gearboxes before they fail. If you've ever traveled across the steel bridge, you'll notice we creep across it at sort of a snail's pace. And as you get across the span lock, it sort of makes a thump, 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 thump. Well, that's because we're crossing over, these very delicate, hard to replace span locks for the bridge lifts there. And we have put a 5-mile-an-hour slow order in there to make sure that we don't further damage the bridge by vibrations. Part of our state of the repair plans is to make some improvements to that bridge, including putting some flange over those span locks so that we can easily travel back at 15 miles an hour. That's just some of the work that needs done there. That bridge is, I think it's over 100 years old, so it definitely needs some work. If we can get our speed up, that's better for on-time performance. Keeping our rails working as they should is a constant effort for us. Part of the state of good repair money will allow us to resurface and reline the track itself. We also hope to do, or plan to do, some Blue Line station renewal, which you've heard about in other briefings, and I'll talk about that a little more as we move forward. And we need to continue replacing those hoists. We have about 5 more that need to be replaced, and they run about $500,000 a piece, so we can't do them all at once for sure. How we get there is, thankfully with the MAP 21 money, TriMet's going to be getting about $4.6 million in the upcoming budget. And we will plan that in carefully into our capital improvement plan process so that it's part of our capital budgeting, and make sure that we have a good track of our prioritization of assets, and we have goals and measurements associated with spending that money. I do want to note, again, just to reinforce, the money can't be siphoned off to use for things like service. The government gives us the money and they fully expect we'll use it for state of good repair. Now remember that a portion of our blue line, as I said, is almost 30 years old. We're going to be focusing our Renew the Blue efforts on 42nd Avenue out to Cleveland. And when I say focusing on it, it's things like going back and replacing lighting that doesn't meet our existing lighting standards. Some of those fixtures are a little, they sort of yellowed, they don't put up the candle light that we wish that they had. Some of the crossings need to have improvements made, whether it's signage or wayfinding, or some of the sidewalks need to be broadened because they were put in at a time when the standards were different, and certainly the amount of population that utilized the stations was different. Pedestrian channeling, we know that there are certain locations where it just makes good sense to put in what we call Z-crossings or bedstead barriers so that we're getting people to turn and actually face the incoming train before they step out into the trackway. This is really about going back and taking the best of what we know and how we build and design our stations today and doing an overlay on what we built 30 years ago and making sure that we have our stations up to snuff. Now, can we do it all? Not with $4.5 million. We certainly can't, but we can start programming in and really focusing on the things that make the most difference. And in the end, it's necessary. As I said, we need it if we're going to have reliable service. We need it to make sure that our operation is safe. It'll increase our productivity, and it'll be a better customer experience, both in when they're waiting for the train, when they're interacting with the trains and buses, and when they're just waiting at the station. They'll have a more comfortable, pleasant experience, which is what you have all charged us with providing. So with that, I can answer any questions, and I have staff available as well. And I apologize for the clicker malfunctions.
Operator error.
I know. I'm sure that I will. I'm sure that I will not hear the end of it. I try not to do it with the clickers.
So questions? One question, Shelley, I just want to make sure when you talked about Renew the Blue, you said you're going to begin at, did you say 42nd or 82nd?
We're going to, 42nd through Cleveland is all getting a review, and then we will prioritize what will be done. That doesn't mean something will be done at each station, but it means that we'll take a good look at both the track and the platforms and see what needs to be done.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Questions?
I guess I'd just say that thank you. I really am pleased with the focus on our infrastructure because we do have a huge investment. I don't know what the overall worth of our transit system is, but it's many billions of dollars, I assume, when you add it all up. And I think what you pointed out is that I think in the next budget, as you put together the budget, one of the things I think maybe you could give us is some of those high-level targets that you're talking about, like for example, the 8-year, goal for eight-year goal for the age of the bus fleet. Just monitoring our progress and meeting some of those key measures to show how we're doing there would be very, very helpful. Because we know we have not only operational issues in terms of service, expanding the service, maintaining service, but oftentimes when we get into financial crunches, deferred maintenance is some of the first things to go, and I think it would be irresponsible for us to allow that to occur. And if we have to allow it to occur, we want to make sure we know where that degradation of the infrastructure is going to be. Pleased to see that. So I'm looking forward to the next budget, kind of having a robust discussion about our progress in maintaining the infrastructure we have. So thank you, Shelley, and thank you to your staff. Good.
Yeah, I mean, this certainly speaks to what we talked about at the recent board retreat in regards to, patient satisfaction. I used to be in healthcare, patient satisfaction, so doctor. To customer satisfaction in regards to on time, I'm still a little surprised at how high that came in as far as on time performance, but I can clearly I mean, if you ask me, that would be one of my main things. That would be a satisfaction point. And as we talked about, and I think it may have been you, Shelley, that talked about the doors. Once a door goes down, it shuts down the whole system in regards to that train. And so this is something that's something that I think, myself will be really interested in as we continue to move forward because of customer satisfaction. I got that right that time. But there always needs to be a balance between, I'm a pilot, so airplanes, when they first built them, they had a much shorter lifespan expected. Now these airplanes, people find out that I fly 1970s Cessna 172s, they don't want to fly with me. I don't know why. They're completely safe. One of my favorite questions I get is, when I walk up to the plane, they're like, "Is this safe?" I look at them and I say, "I don't plan to die today." But, so that's something that we've got to balance out, but understanding the situation between this satisfaction piece and our customer base and making sure that we keep things in reliable order and making sure they're working is something that's going to be a delicate balance with cost constraints and dollars that we know are always seem to be limited. And one thing that I can gain a further appreciation on is the other evening I was watching a show on an accident that occurred back in DC on their system a little while ago, and the NTSB faulted upgrading and maintaining the system in a reliable state is one of the major factors that led to that situation. So it's not only the things that we just mentioned, but it's sometimes can be critical to making sure safety is a key concern. So with Bruce, I would also applaud the work that's done here, and it'll be great to keep us and the board really informed as we continue to try and balance all of these things. What are the key things that allow us to, one, make sure we have safety concerns taken care of, and then two, how do we make sure that we're answering and responding to our customer base in a way that keeps them confident the system is going to fulfill their needs. So again, I second what Bruce said and say thank you.
Any comments or questions to the general manager too? All right, then let's move on to our regular business meeting. The first item on our business meeting is the consent agenda. For those in the audience, this is the agenda where we put items that are considered routine and may be approved by the board in a single motion. Today we have 3 items. We have the approval of the board minutes for November 28th, a resolution 12-12-102 authorizing a contract for elevator consultant services, and the third is a resolution 12-12-103 appropriating funds and authorizing pass-through of grants. So is there any of the items that any of the board members like removed from the consent agenda? If not, then I would entertain a motion to approve the consent agenda.
So moved, Mr. President.
Motion?
Second.
We have a second. Any discussion on the motion? All those in favor of the motion, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? No. The motion is approved unanimously. Thank you. So let's move on to our resolutions. The first resolution then is resolution 12-12-104, authorizing issuance of revenue bonds. Mr. General Manager.
Mr. Board President, members of the board, this follows on from an action that the board actually took previously, which was to actually authorize these revenue bonds. This series of revenue bonds are those that are necessary, sometimes we call them bridge financing, related to the long-term receipt of federal funds. And this May, we signed the full funding grant agreement for the Portland-Milwaukee project, which commits the federal government to the receipt of those funds during a period of time between 2012 and 2019. And recall, we've received about $80 million of those funds already, and we would expect this year's appropriations, once they're finally approved, to also include about $100 million for the project. And that would be about the pay down that the federal government is expecting and has outlined in an attachment to that full funding grant agreement. So what these funds do is actually provide that bridge between the actual receipt of those cash and the call that the construction effort actually has in terms of the need for funds. And as we discussed at some length with the Finance Committee, this is actually being done in 2 layers. The first layers are a series of bonds, which is what is being requested for the authorization right now, in a total amount of about $350 million. And this would be structured bonds That is what we know we absolutely will require in terms of the bridge funding over a period of time. Then we also anticipate at a future date coming back to the board with a variable portion of that, which will allow us to adjust to the actual receipt of the federal funds over a period of time. So that will be sort of fine tuning of the cash flow over a period of time. I would also note that this was actually authorized by the board with a December 2010 resolution, and that's where we published the 60-day notice for revenue bonds, and no remonstrances or no petitions were held related to that resolution. So, but again, per our normal procedure, we come back for the actual sale, and that actual sale is ahead of us now, and so the timeline is right to actually ask for board approval of that. Dave Oxley is here to answer all the technical questions about this, of which there are many. But I'd be happy to answer any questions or field them to Dave.
Questions right now? I see that we have one individual who like to testify on this item. Should we have that testimony and then see if we have any other questions? Okay. John Charles, come on up here. Good morning. Good morning.
Morning, Mr. Chairman. My name is John Charles, President of Cascade Policy Institute. In reading the staff report, I was noticing on page 2 that these are secured by many things, including liens on future payroll taxes, and bonds will be full faith and credit obligations, so you agree to pay bondholders from any and all lawful sources. So this continues the trend by which increasingly first claim on your revenues go to Wall Street bondholders and then retirees, and then if you have any money left over, you'll put some transit service out there. And given that in the last 8 years your service has dropped by 14% and continues to drop, at some point the public might get upset about that, and you're just continuing to do more of it. Now, the second point I'll draw to your attention is on page 1 of the staff memo at the bottom, where it talks about how safe this is because you're bonding against expected revenues from Congress, and that the FTA has a 100% track record in honoring their total obligations. Well, you know, people who are during an investment bubble, during the time they're creating the bubble, they never see what's going wrong. If they did, there wouldn't be a bubble. And if you've bought stocks and bonds, you know there's always an expression. Past performance is not a guarantee of future results. And maybe one of the reasons that there's 100% track record here is because communities on the receiving end of light rail projects actually wanted the project. But the election changed it. There are now majority members on Milwaukee City Council who don't want Milwaukee Light Rail. There's now a majority of members on the Clackamas County Commission who hate this project. There are 2 people who are no longer in, whose political career is winding down because 4 days before a ballot measure was to be voted on, they took $20 million of debt to the county to hand over to you. So what could go wrong when we have a 100% track record in the past? Does that guarantee future results? Well, not really. FTA can promise lots of things. Congress has to actually appropriate money. FTA doesn't tell Congress what to do. And I'm not saying what's going to happen, because of course I don't know, as you don't. But what would happen if perhaps letters started arriving from the Milwaukee City Council or the Clackamas County Commission repeatedly over the next couple of years to Congress, asking them not to fund the project because we don't want the project. You have a responsibility to undertake due diligence, to look at all the things that could go wrong. Some things could go wrong, and if they do, these are full faith and credit obligations. Riders are now 3rd on your priority list. So I know how these votes go. I know what's going to happen here, but I'm just saying things can go wrong.
questions or comments by the board? Okay, with that, I would entertain a motion then to approve Resolution 12-12-104.
So moved.
Your motion, your second? Your second? Good. This is probably one that warrants a little bit of discussion as we move forward. Is there any discussion before we vote, or would you like to just call for the vote and make your comments known at the vote, if you have any? Want to do that? All right, so why don't we, actually, we don't do a roll call vote on this, so no, we want it, so let's have some discussion on this one. I think this is important. This is a $325 million authorization here, again, 745 million, or whatever the number is, 745 million, yes, total potential.
Federal funds.
Right. I guess I just, as the board chair, want to make it clear that, we do rely a lot on the analysis and the work that's been done in putting these bond issues together. I see Harvey Rogers' signature on the resolution that we would be adopting. I have a lot of faith in Harvey Rogers and his firm in terms of looking at the risks that are confronting TriMet. I think John Charles makes a very good point that there's, the past is never a complete indication of what happens in the future. But I think we have a very good track record with the federal government. They have been delivering those federal dollars, sometimes not as quickly as we like. That's why we need to do this interim financing to secure and move the project forward. But I do have confidence in my conversations with members of the congressional delegation. I believe they're very much behind this project. They view it as an economic development opportunity for the region, as well as a major piece of the transportation infrastructure for the future of this region. So understanding there's risks with any of this, I have faith in the folks who looked at this. I also have faith, frankly, in folks managing a project. If we get into trouble, if the federal government decides to pull out, we will adjust and make changes as necessary to reduce spending, stop spending, and look at ways to minimize the impacts on our general fund and on our resources. But this is a very important project. I think it is one that's underway, and if we don't move forward with this, this project will just take a lot longer and cost a lot more money to move forward. So those would be my comments on this. I don't know if anybody else has any other thoughts. But that's what.
Yeah.
Oh, great. Sorry.
No.
Yeah, this is not an unusual action. It's been done many times before, not only here at TriMet, but in other agencies managing large public projects. Oftentimes it's necessary to arrange for interim financing pending the receipt of the final funding. You do, I think John is right that you can never be 100% certain that the past is prologue. But you do look at the track record, you do look at the relationships that have been built up, you look at the commitments that have been made, and that gives you a reasonable basis to proceed. These are full faith and credit. Again, John is correct about that. And again, that is not unusual. The purpose of that is to get the best interest rate possible, and that reduces the overall cost of the project. I have seen financings like these that have been secured solely by the project resources. And it works. It is more expensive. And so this is a way to bring the cost down to the entire project and ultimately to the region. The trick on making the full faith and credit is in the management of the project and the management of the finances. So you don't actually have to exercise that pledge. And again, TriMet has a very good track record in that regard, as do all other Oregon agencies that use the full faith and credit pledge. And so I have no qualms about moving forward in this manner. Thanks.
I would just agree with Craig. I think very well said. And agree with both board president and my fellow board chair.
Any comments? Travis?
So, I'll start by saying I'll be supportive of this resolution, but also point out and agree with Mr. Charles in regards to the overall concern of what's occurred and what's transpired to the city to the southeast of us in regards to what, some of the things that occurred there, especially with their election and some of the rhetoric that's coming out of there. We can't just discount that completely and say it doesn't change kind of landscape of what we're up against as a board or as a team. So that's something that we'll need to take a look at, and we'll need to continue to be diligent about, not vigilant, diligent about as we move forward. And I do want to point out that ultimately, these decisions, sometimes they may appear that we're only working with one thing, but as we look at these decisions, we're considering them along a continuum of decisions that are very, very complex. And so to take this out of that and say that we're not going to do this because this may have a level of risk to it, when this is really a domino that has an effect on many things down the line, like was pointed out already, is something that we can't do. We don't have the luxury of just pulling it out and saying we're not going to move forward on something because it has risk associated with it. We know that I'm confident that the board is, we're taking a big look at everything in regards to our finances, in regards to our debt obligations, in regards to our future obligations, and we're working hard at making sure that we tackle all of these things in the big continuum of what we're working on. And so as we move forward with this decision, it's not that we haven't considered everything else that's on our plate. We consider this along with those items, and the writers, and that's why we're doing this, is because the end goal needs to be to ensure that we've got a transit system here in the region that supports economic development, that supports movement from poverty to prosperity, to ensure that everybody has the opportunity to move forward in our region, and that we can compete both nationally and internationally. So with that, I'm supportive of this as we move forward with this line that we've started see it through to completion, and do everything that we can to ensure that all those dollars flow as they should from the federal level into where they need to. And I think that's going to be a concerted effort from everybody involved. So I'm supportive of this resolution.
Anybody else? Okay, with that, are we ready to vote? Here we are. Call for the vote. All right. So we have a motion for the approval of Resolution 12-12-104, authorizing issuance of revenue bonds. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. All those opposed? Any abstentions? Hearing none, the motion is approved unanimously. Thank you very much to the staff, and thank you, John, for taking time to testify before us today. Let's move on to Resolution 12-12-105, which is authorizing a contract with Stacy and Whitbeck for construction of the Ruby Junction Rail Operations Facility Phase 1 Expansion Project. Mr. General Manager.
Mr. President, members of the board, this is a contract that is was subject to actually a two-step proposal where we actually look for qualifications first, and then we actually ask those firms that are qualified to provide their bid. And we go through a number of steps during the qualification phase to make sure that the contractor involved actually is capable of doing this work. And this work is absolutely critical for us. And it is, of course, an expansion and remodeling of the Ruby Junction Maintenance Facility in Gresham to host the additional 19 light rail vehicles that are part of the Portland-Milwaukee project. I would also note that at the same time, this has been thought through and pre-engineered so that we can also go to a Phase 2 expansion, which would be necessary for the Columbia River Crossing project. So we are expanding the site and the facility with a master plan in mind that would accommodate both those projects in the long term. But this is just the Portland-Milwaukee portion, which is funded by, again, the full funding grant agreement for the Portland-Milwaukee project. We have the fortune of very qualified contractors that we have worked with in the past in our alignment. And as you can see in the staff report, the bids were very close between number 1 and number 2. The lowest bid was Stacy and Whitbeck, who, as you know, we have a number of other business arrangements and contracts with. They offered the lowest price as well as a very high disadvantaged business component to the project, which was 22%, and that was committed to them in the step one qualification step. In addition, because that came in substantially under what our project budget was, we had a series of options, or at least a particular option is noted in your staff report, that we would like to go ahead and execute at this point in time because we are under budget and we can actually accommodate this additional work. And so that would bring the price to $15,768,188. And we have project manager Thomas highlighted if there are questions, but we do recommend your approval. Very competitive bid and a very good contractor.
Questions of Neil? We want to have Dan come up with any further information on this one? I'm seeing none. With that, then, I'd entertain a motion to approve Resolution 12-12-105.
So moved.
Motion?
Second.
Second. Any further discussion? Okay. All those in favor of the motion to approve Resolution 12-12-105, which is authorizing the contract with Stacy and Whitbeck for the construction of the Ruby Junction Rail Operations Facility Phase 1 Expansion Project. All those signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Hearing none, the motion is approved unanimously. Thank you very much. Moving on to the last resolution, the last item of business today, we have Resolution 12-12-106, which is authorizing a contract with Warren Pacific Corporation for bus stop, shelter, and amenity installation and maintenance services. Mr. General Manager.
Board President, members of the board, again, this is a contract that we have had for some time and would continue to have, and it does actually provide the response to emergencies for example, vandalism at bus stop shelters where glass needs to be replaced. Also provides the services necessary to move the shelters, sometimes in conjunction with development or service changes, and also ultimately to grow the number of shelters, which we've been very successful at over the last few years. And again, this was a competitive proposal. We had two proposals from Warren Pacific and from Ortiz and Associates. We have done work with both firms in the past, and both are good quality contractors. Warren Pacific was the low-priced contractor, and again, the price was significantly below the independent cost estimate that was done for this contract. I would note that Warren Pacific is also the incumbent on this contract and has been performing these work for quite some time. They have a very diverse workforce, but and I think as the nature of this work, not a lot of subcontracting opportunities because they essentially do all the response themselves. So because of that, there's relatively small disadvantaged business component, but nonetheless, they have a very diverse workforce and offer the work, and perform the work, I think, to our satisfaction historically. And I would also note that this does require a quick response, and many times, I can remember in my neighborhood, a bus shelter was mowed over by an out-of-control vehicle, and frankly, that was done in the evening. By the morning, actually, that shelter was gone and cleaned up, and that was because of the Warren Pacific contract. So those are the kinds of services we ask for from this contractor. So with that, we'd recommend approval.
Questions? Seeing none, then I'd entertain a motion to approve Resolution 12-12-106.
So moved.
I have a motion.
Second?
I have a second. Any further discussion? Okay. All those in favor of the motion to approve Resolution 12-12-106, authorizing a contract with Warren Pacific Corporation for bus stop shelter and amenity installation and maintenance services. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Any abstentions? The motion is approved unanimously. That concludes all of the business items for today's